Professor William Gumede, thank you very much for joining us for this podcast, which we do for the Southern African Institute of Government Auditors, where we promote accountability, transparency, and of course, enhancing performance in the process. Now, we invited you to be with us here for this podcast to reflect on the state of the nation by President Cyril Ramaphosa recently. And let me jump back for a moment and recognize that you are the founding director of Democracy Works Foundation, and congratulations for that. And it's partly because of that position, your position, that I invited you to talk to us. Now, this is an annual event in South Africa. It's regarded as a very important political event. Analysts, commentators like yourself, ordinary citizens look forward to the speech, and we take it that that's what's going to give us the direction as the country. But this time around, in 2025, it happens the backdrop of what appears to be a fallout with the American administration, the new government of President Trump. I want us to start there so we can get that one out of the way before we focus on the meat, the substance of the president's speech. What did you make of the emerging squabbles or fallout between the South African government and people and the Trump administration?
Well, thank you for having me on the podcast. I'm very excited to speak to you. It's been quite a long while since we have had a conversation. So it's always, it's always really enlightening and for me, enjoyment to have conversations with you. Let's just start I'll start with governance in relation to our fight now with the new Trump, South Africa's fight with the new Trump administration. The first thing is, I know a lot of people would say, it's about the Expropriation Act and not about the accusations that they have land grabs of white farmers' property and so on. But I think we have to look at it as at a bigger governance level. So what has happened in the last couple of years? So when the ANC was the dominant government before the multi-party government now, government of national unity, many of our ANC government's policies were perceived to be anti-US or anti-American. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's the first. Secondly, South Africa was perceived to be, during the ANC dominant government, pro-Russia and pro-China, and in our participation in BRICS was seen as to be pro-China and Russia, specifically in BRICS, because BRICS originally had other members also. There's Brazil and there's India. The Americans don't have the same view, for example, of India and Brazil. But they have a different view of us because now, again, it's a governance, and I'm going to come back to why I'm saying it's a governance issue, is that when countries put together policies, and including foreign policies, the governance part of it is that foreign policies must always be in the interest of a country's national interests, right? Now, the problem is with liberation movements when they come to power, particularly African liberation movements, they often make the mistake, and as a governance mistake of, they adopt policies which is in the interest, from a governance point of view, in the interest of the party and the interest of the past, not necessarily the interest of the country, not sort of a South Africa first, but the party first. And that is why many parties, liberation movements in government, why they fail in government. So they fail to make the transition from a liberation movement, which is the party first, the leaders first, the ideology first, past allies first. From that transition to a more modern governing party, more grown up, more mature governing party, when governance changes from, now, if you're a governing party, it is the country's interest. And the country's interest is not necessarily the same as the party's interest or the party's ideology interest. So many of our foreign policies have been, when the ANC was the dominant party, has been party interests rather than the country's interests. And that, I say, is a governance issue, because if you're in government, the governance rule is, when you're a governing party, the policies that you make must be, from a governance point of view, in the interest of the country, not in the interest of the party or the party's past friends. Now, specifically on, how the ANC's previous positions in relation to the US. Remember, two or 3 years ago, the big debate was whether the US will cancel the African Growth Act, Opportunities Act, AGOA. And at that time was the perceived anti-Americanism of the then ANC-dominant government. So it all comes from there. So it's not, Trump just didn't wake up.
Yeah. The reaction in South Africa we were taken by surprise. And of course, a lot of people got upset by all of that. But the way you explain it is as if, it's been long time coming. And for those who analyze these things, you would have seen that something like this would happen.
Absolutely, not only seen, but we actually warned. If you look at, I warned, but many others in South Africa, we've been warning to say, look, when we do these foreign policies, it's all good and well to have a foreign policy based on ideology or foreign policy based on emotions. But does a emotional-based foreign policy or ideology-based foreign policy work for our country, for the people of our country? What is our interest? What is our interest, whether it is local or foreign? Our interest is we need to create jobs as quickly as possible. We need to deal with poverty as quickly as possible. That's our interest. That's our fundamental interest. If you look, Trump, he says America first. For America, according to the Trump presidency, is how they create, their businesses must be protected. Jobs must be protected. That must be our interest. Now, often when an organization, when the ANC was the dominant party, it made decisions for the party which then went against our interests. For example, when it was the party in government, when it was dominant, when it was anti-American and perceived to be anti-American, that perception of being anti-American prior to Trump coming to power harmed our interests already then. Harmed our jobs interests, because we need, what we need development aid from America. We got development aid from America. We need American businesses, to invest here. We need, America to take our kids to America to be educated. Cultural exchanges, our musicians, to go to America to play there. We need America more than America needs us. So then from a governance point of view, our policies towards America cannot be seen to be anti-American. If it's anti-American, we have to do something proactively to prevent it to be seen that way. So that unfortunately...
But before I close on this part, and I may come back to it later on in our conversation, reading the comments by influential South Africans, including ordinary South Africans, a lot of people are upset and think that we have a Trump problem, and their reaction is to criticize, to accuse, and in some instances to, for lack of a word, insult. In a way, predominantly emotional response to that, right? So blaming everybody else, but not analyzing the way you have now. Why do you think that is the case?
What we've got is we've got a governance problem ourselves. We have to, if we can learn out of this issue, if we can learn a couple of important things for us, is in terms of how do we make policies, the governance of our policies that we make, how do we make policies that is in the interest of ordinary South Africans, in the interest of the economy, not policies that are ideology-based or emotional-based. So there's no place for emotional-based policies if you want to create jobs or if you want to tackle poverty. So that's a very, very important thing. And I said it is a governance thing, because if you're a governing party, you have to look at the interests of all of South Africa and the interest of all of South Africa's jobs, poverty, and so on, along. So that's really important. Now, from a governance point of view, what do we do now? So, that's where, from my vantage point, what do we do now? I think it's absolutely going to be important that that ANC members of cabinet or of parliament and ANC leaders, because of their past, they are being seen as the people in our government who are anti-American. that they don't make wild statements. So it's going to be very important from the President Cyril Ramaphosa, as the president of the country and the leader of the government of national unity, that he, from a governance point of view, actually set a rule that there are no wild statements, no emotional statements, no popular statements from the ANC leaders. I mean, we've already seen, for example, our Minister of Minerals, Gumede, was saying, let's just take all of our minerals and don't sell it to the US and sell it somewhere else. Now, reality doesn't work. That unfortunately doesn't work.
That would be seen as provocative, I suppose.
Yeah, but it also, you can't turn around. The real economy doesn't work. That's therefore you can't move your products from one country to another in a space of like a couple of days or a couple of weeks. The world doesn't work that. It's kind of fantasy world. But it is going to be important that the president, how must the president resolve this? Now, this is a very, very big crisis. So we must take it as a very big crisis. We mustn't take it as a Trump problem. We must take it as an SA problem. Yeah, from a governance point of view, this is an SA problem now, and this may be one of our biggest crises. And this is a crisis comes at the wrong time, at a moment where we want delivery, we want high economic growth, we want jobs, and so on. So, what the president needs to do, and this is absolutely very important, what a mature governing party would do, a good governance governing party will do, is to say, this crisis is so big, let's bring in South Africa Inc. So it's not just the ANC, or not even just the Government of National Unity, but South African Inc. Who is South African Inc.? South African Inc. would be initially starting with all of the GNU partners, the Government of National Unity partners. They have to co-think now out of this crisis, but then bringing in expertise across South Africa. So bring in business, because they are, most probably will be much more experienced
in practical terms,
in practical terms, and how to engage with the Trump administration than a government official or a politician. Bring in civil society. Many of the civil society organizations have been engaging with the US and so on. Bring it in and bring in other kinds of expertise. That's going to be very important from a governance point of view. That is now almost like a SA Inc., almost like a social pack of ideas and of people sitting outside the ANC, sitting outside government. That's the first part of it. The second part of it is to say, South Africans or people who are born in South Africa who are part of the Trump inner circle, bring them in. I mean, that's if I was at a president position or having to advise the president, I would have done that almost immediately before even responding, to say, we need to have a channel, a direct channel to President Trump. Now, how do we do that? Let's figure out there are many, many influential South Africans in their Trump movements and in their, that have Trump's ears. So actually get him together into some kind of forum and meet with him and say, how do we co-plot a way out of this thing? So, because that will be, from a governance point of view, a South African Inc. If it was just an ANC Inc., like in the past when the ANC was a majority party, the ANC would have appointed its own people, scream and shout emotionally, blame, victim, and so on. There is no place for victimhood in the ruthless competitive politics, global politics. So that's the SA Inc. So immediately what the president needs to do from a governance point of view, bring in those South Africans who are aligned and linked to Trump, and speak to the Republicans also, not just with the Democrats, because the Republicans are in power, so get them together. But in South Africa, build a very, very big front of bringing in business, civil society, expertise, and so on. And then maybe the last one is in terms of, when the ANC, when the Government of National Unity started, the ANC appointed Ibrahim Rasool as the South African ambassador in the US. Now, that appointment was typically an ANC interest rather than a country interest type of appointment, because, in the past, the ANC said, well, we are governments, we will appoint people based on our ideology, based on our interests, not necessarily the country interests. So, obviously, Ibrahim Rasool is a good person, he's a competent person, but in this moment, in this crisis, he may be the wrong person. We may need a much more, a person that will be a South African that will be perceived as more acceptable to a Trump movement. So maybe a person like a Tony Leon, for example, who was our ambassador to Argentina, something like that. And that would be, from a governance point of view, would be SA Inc. Looking at it as SA Inc. Who are the best people now, to navigate this process?
Okay, let me leave that issue for a moment and come to just brief response from your side. It's important as well that these things happen at a time when South Africa lost soldiers, members of the SANDF in the east of the DRC, and that in itself led to some confrontations between the Rwandan president, Paul Kagame, and our president here. Your brief comments on that before we come to the domestic issues.
Yeah. I mean, again, this is the governance of foreign policy, again, right? When the ANC was a dominant party, it made foreign policy which was almost against the country's interest from a governance point of view. For example, I mean, supporting regimes in Africa, liberation movements that cause chaos in their countries, and then the chaos spills out to us. For example, having a foreign policy supporting ZANU-PF in Zimbabwe, or supporting in Mozambique the former liberation movement, and then those movements in power then cause chaos. They're autocratic, and then they starve their countries, economic crisis, and then people come to South Africa. So that governance that started off making a policy decision based on bad governance then impact on us at home. Now let's come to the Democratic Republic of the Congo. I mean, outside South Africa, there are two key regional organizations that we expect to deal with conflicts like that. One is the South African Development Community. The other one is the African Union. Now, from a governance point of view, both of these regional and continental institutions will actually be structurally unable to deal with conflicts. Why am I saying that? Just look at the leadership of the AU, the African Union. Most of these leadership are dictators, military leaders. I mean, a third of African countries are run by military leaders, and then another third are run by dictators, and then another a big part are run by liberation movements who've been clinging on to power. Now, because all of you've got these leaders who are members, they don't have the credibility to speak to their peers, to negotiate with their peers, because they're all equally corrupt or equally dictators. Yeah. So that really is the other governance problems that we are sitting. I mean, it's on the continent, in the region, the same with SADC. I'll just give you an example from a governance point of view. Now, there's a crisis also in Mozambique. For example, that the opposition in Mozambique says, well, the elections were stolen. Now, SADC then decided to send the Zimbabwe leader to try to mediate. I mean, just think of it from a governance point of view. I mean, the opposition they're not going to take it seriously because they say, but this man was also accused in Zimbabwe of stealing the elections. Why are we going to listen to them? So from so let's come directly to the DRC. I mean, critics of South Africa sending its soldiers there say, well, we're there to do peace, to keep peace, but we've been sending our soldiers without support, without the necessary equipment, without the necessary logistic, without even an exit out, right? And potentially even without a proper mandate, people go there, they actually don't exactly know what they're doing there, or they don't know really the layout.
It was never really communicated
absolutely
over a period of time, which is probably something that South Africans should have been updated on, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. So that, again, is a governance issue. So why are our soldiers there without any equipment? Because, again, if you look at our defense force, our South African National Defense Force right now, because of poor governance, poorly run, so bad money has been badly used because of poor governance, from corruption to incompetence. I mean, that has led to our group, our peacekeeping group, actually not getting their resources on time. So again, just to show you how important this governance is, even from, if you look at, our military equipment, we've got we've got a a company which is state-owned that produces military equipment. Now, because of the poor governance, that company, like other state-owned entities, have not delivered and have been unable to take advantage of the opportunities in the world, because we are now, since the Russia-Ukraine conflict and the Gaza conflict, and now I think with the Trump government, it seems every country in the world is trying to arm themselves, and it's a chaotic world. Now, if we had good governance in our state-owned arms company, we could have made arms for export, and so on. So you can see, like, it's almost at every level how bad or poor governance impact.
Now, let me bring this back to South Africa now, because you've been in that space of analyzing political developments for years. The president prepares the State of the Nation address. He's got to address specific issues.
Totally.
From your point of view, what do you think are the major issues that should have been front and center in the president's State of the Nation address? And then we can deal with them one by one on the basis of what he said recently.
I mean, I was very disappointed in the State of the Nation address of the president. I mean, there was actually an opportunity to give us, new direction, because now, we're moving from an ANC-dominant government to a multi-party government. So, we need a new direction to say where we're going now. We know all of our problems. Now, where we're going. For example, I think for me, the key shortcomings of that speech is we've got structural impediments that undermines economic growth and undermines job creation and undermines poverty reduction. What are these structural things? Like, the first thing is corruption. I mean, we've got systemic corruption, and because every decision is or policy are being captured, we don't get good outcomes. We don't get the jobs being created. We don't get the public service to deliver. Yeah. Secondly, competence in the state is a lack of competence is a structural impediment to creating jobs and to getting economic growth. Incompetence is because of cadre deployment to the senior levels of government. Then the other. Our other big issue is lack of rule of law in the country. You could. We've seen it. Was it 2 weeks ago? Taxi associations were alleged to have torch and to burn 51 bicycle buses in Mpumalanga, for example. There's been no accountability. Infrastructure been destroyed. So that's a lack of rule of law, and so on. We've seen, for example, in KwaZulu-Natal and then other provinces, the construction mafia. Even if government or the private sector, if you want to build anything or develop anything in some of the provinces, unless you pay up to the construction mafia, you're not going to get anywhere. And the same, for example, if you drive your car, you'll be hijacked. So, that's a breakdown of rule of law. So those are the things that needed to be dealt with. So it means that, coming back to the president's SONA, it means that almost every new program that the president announced, whether it's on infrastructure and so on, if it doesn't deal with these structural impediments, corruption, incompetence, lack of rule of law, state failure and so on, their money and the project will just disappear again. Right? So that's, for me, is a big disappointment. The second one is in terms of, the president again announced many new projects, many new infrastructure projects. But the problem is we have had no update of previous infrastructure projects. Like, for example, he promised a couple of years ago, there's going to be 1 million houses in Alexandra, for example. We haven't seen that. And that is just one or two of it. If you can remember, even during the Mbeki presidency and the Zuma presidency, there were announcements of 800 billion rand infrastructure. We have never had a feedback. What has happened to that 800 billion infrastructure? Is it the same thing that's been recycled over and over by the same, just by a different president? So for me, that's a disappointment. A State of the Nation address should be almost a report back on previous promises to say, last year I promised you, the nation, these things. This is the update. I promised, I'm going to deliver so many jobs. This is the update. And then the other half would be to say what we're doing now, where we're going. So I think it was a missed opportunity.
Well, is there anything that you regard as maybe optimistic in what he spoke about? I will be specific that he mentioned something about 3% growth this year, that's what the government is aiming for. But of course, history speaks for itself. What do you think?
Can I just tell you, if we only cut, let's say the president announced no new program, no new infrastructure program, no new anti-poverty, no new job creation program, but the president only announced a 20% cut in corruption. And only a 20% cut in corruption, or it's selected, in the catalytic economic sector. A 20% merit base in, again, the key economic sectors in the state, and maybe a 20% bringing a rule of law back in the critical economic sectors. That will give us a 3% growth and beyond. So that's when I said that, we are not focusing on the right priorities. We don't need even so that 3% growth by just taking off genuinely dealing with corruption, incompetence, and not even dealing with it in a widespread way. Just say in a targeted process, say, well, there's a state, it's corrupt, we can't deal with all the corruption, but we will deal with the mission critical growth departments in state-owned entities. And we will only focus on, let's say, the senior management. We won't even focus on the bottom, and we'll focus on procurement, because procurement is key in the state. And so on. So, and that's my disappointment. So, the things that he presented as new, some of it are not new, sort of old things is dressed up as new. But secondly, also, anything that is new will just disappear unless we deal with corruption or we deal with incompetence and we deal with the rule of law, because it will just disappear.
Now, this economic growth that we talk about is not something that we should play with, I think, and mention it in a wishful way, because the unemployment rate in the country is unacceptably high. It's at 32% overall, but we are told around 60% of people below the age of 35 who are not in school, not being trained and so on, are unemployed. So it's a serious issue. Obviously, you've mentioned the question of poverty. Up to almost 30 million South Africans are said to be living in poverty. The government itself tells us about the 19,700,000 people who are receiving social grants, right? Maybe others, should receive the pensioners and so on. But to have such a substantial number says a lot. It's an indictment on South Africa. Now, I have never heard, and you may know better than I know because you analyze and observe these things. The state never calls on itself to perform economically. By that I mean, the president speaks, yes. Mm-hmm. What is the responsibility of, say, provinces to contribute to the growth of the GDP? One step further, at municipal level, in fact, some municipalities seem to be an impediment to economic growth. Ditsobotla in Northwest is an example, and many other municipalities that have denied services to industries and business people. Why is it never something mentioned to those in government across the board to say, hey guys, you got to perform, of course, minimize or eradicate corruption, because we all have got to contribute to the performance of the economy to deal with the challenges we always talk about.
You're absolutely correct, because growth has actually been undermined by the fact that the state is not delivering, whether the national, state, or the provincial level of municipalities. That's one of that actually kills growth. It's been killing growth. So even if we can get, as I said earlier, even if we just a 10 to 20% increase in performance at a national level and at a provincial level and at a municipal level, and we don't even have to, we could say, it doesn't have to be across the board. It was just in a key, if the president, for example, say, you know what, I'm going to look, what are the key catalytic departments? We know, your transport departments. We know home affairs, because, if you don't have documents, and we know other things where you have to administer DTI, a business, and things like that. let's identify the 5-6 mission critical entities important for growth. Let's do it. We know education. I mean, for example, the president hasn't said anything about education, and we know. I mean, our big crisis now is there are many matriculants with the right results are not able to get in at university, for example. So, where's our plans to build new universities? Appropriate for economy? Where's our plans to build artists, to bring back the artisan schools that was very successful during your party, but that the government closed down? Where's our plans to bring the technical colleges that we can put in the rural areas and then they can become growth zones for us? So none of those things were there. So when I said earlier on, my disappointment is in terms of not focusing on the basics, but always talking about bringing new programs. I mean, I was a member of the president's task team 2 years ago on the professionalization of the public service. We were 6 or 7 outsiders. We came in as experts. The president made a big announcement in Parliament, and at his exit statement of the Nation address, and said, "You know what? I am now appointing experts. They're going to look for 18 months, 12 to 18 months. They're going to look at this." At the public service, and they're going to give me recommendations in terms of how do we turn around this animal, this Titanic that is failing. We made the recommendations, but very little of those recommendations have been implemented. So it's exactly, coming back to what you were saying, is that the poor performance of the state is an impediment to growth. So why did the president in SONA not say anything about it, to say, these are 1, 2, 3 things I'm going to do. We gave him, even from our professionalization report of the public service, we gave him a couple of things to say. Look, let's be, we try to be very pragmatic and practical, not overly ideological. And we say, look, start small, and start small to say, just focus, for example, on the key departments, public service departments that are key to economic growth. Let's clean them up. And it can start off by just making merit appointments at a top level, not even at a low level, but just at a top level, and deal with corruption there and make it efficient. And if we can do that turnaround, it will help with economic growth. So that's when I said earlier on that my disappointment is that the real structural issues that we need to deal with, the president didn't deal with it. Because I'll tell you why, and it's a governance issue why I think the president hasn't dealt with it, and the president hasn't dealt with it before. It is from a governance point of view, it will impact ANC party interests. So this is now, it's a clash between the ANC party interests and the country's interests. Why am I saying that? Because, the individuals who are deployed at their senior levels and who may be incompetent will be senior people in the ANC leadership, or they will be senior trade union leaders aligned to the ANC, linked to COSATU, or to the Communist Party. To fire them is perceived to be against the ANC's party interests.
But as we conclude, we're here now. We've got the government of national unity made up of other parties, and the one other relatively dominant party in there is the DA, for instance. And ideologically, they're different to ANC. This GNU formation, has it in any way influenced events and developments in a pro-South African way? And if that is the case, even if it's not the case, how sustainable is it under President Cyril Ramaphosa?
So to start off, just from a governance point of view, the model of coalitions is the perfect model in a diverse society like South Africa. And I know there are many critics who say, coalitions will be chaos and lockjam and so on. And I know I also have a conflict of interest because I co-chaired the saga process, the government process before last year's general election to come up with proposals on a coalition law. As an outsider, I was asking to say, can you co-chair the process and give us some recommendations? But if you look at a long history in Africa, so the first African country became independent, Liberia, almost 200 years ago. If you look at all of the governance models in Africa, there's 54 African countries. The coalition model has been the most successful. So it's not military rule or Liberation Party rule, but coalition rule. whether it's Mauritius or whether it is in the Gambia more recently. So coalitions have been the most successful, but also in other parts of the world. If you think about a German economic miracle after the Second World War, if you think about since 1945, they only had one-term government that wasn't a coalition. Switzerland, the same. So all of the great growth miracles actually came through coalitions. Even if you take it outside Africa and outside the developed world in Brazil, think about it, the post-90s has been a Brazilian economic miracle. The coalitions there has been consistent. 10 in 11 parties, cross-ideological coalitions has delivered Brazilian growth. And prior to that, when it was military rule in Brazil, they were the same crisis they had the same crises in governance crises and delivery crises that other governments have. So you see how important it is. And in a diverse society like South Africa, it's even more important. So I'm very excited about the fact that we have a government of national unity, because what it brings to us, the positive part of it is in our diverse society, it brings different ideas and different energies and different ways of looking and different imaginations together to think about South African Inc. We've seen it the last 30 years when the ANC was the dominant party, that a dominant party in a diverse society doesn't work unless that dominant party becomes very diverse. So the ANC wasn't diverse. We've seen it in other parts of Africa where countries are even less diverse than us. When there's a dominant party that only looks at the interest or after the interest of that party or that ethnic group or that regional group and so on, it doesn't deliver growth and the jobs and prosperity. So that is, for me, the positive thing is that we've got a government of national unity. We've potentially now have a broad church in government which could deliver better than a dominant, if it was just a dominant party. Now, the important thing is for the recipe for success is whether the ANC and President Ramaphosa can utilize the skill set and the energy and ideas of the non-ANC partners. If they only forces the ANC policies, if they say, well, we are still the dominant party in this GNU, our policies will be the policies of the GNU, then it's going to be chaos. It's not going to work. So in order for the GNU to work, it's going to be very, very important that they are collaborative and that the ANC culture changes from a majority-based culture, because, it has been in power at a majority. And when it was a majority party, its view on policies carried. Now it is in a multi-party government with other parties. So if you can make the transition to say now it needs to collaborate, now it needs to compromise. For example, just take the things that hasn't happened, that shows you the old culture of dominant party culture is still in that GNU of dominant ANC culture. On the expropriation bill, for example, and the NHI and the Bella, so the Bella Act. So these three very controversial laws were opposed prior to the last year's general election by the opposition parties that are now part of the ANC's GNU. Now, a mature way and a grown-up way and a good governance way of how dealing with those issues would have been for the president to say, I know we've fought over these controversial issues. These three bills, there are many others, but these are the three things on the public debate. They are party interest ones, not country interests, So let's sit down and let's work out a compromise that will work for the country, right? And so on. But sadly, the president didn't do that and the ANC didn't do that. And that is also now, we almost end up now back on the Trump. For example, on the expropriation, our constitution makes it possible for expropriation now to actually go and put together now an act, knowing it's going to be very controversial, when the Constitution already makes provisions for that. Of course, it's going to have a response. Every policy that you make is going to have a response. So I think the Expropriation Act was done based on the ANC's party interests and ideological interests and emotional interests to show, many of those members and leaders in the ANC who are opposed to the ANC's journey with the DA and the IFP to show that the ANC is still in charge, that the ANC is not anti-transformation, now pushing those bills. So it's almost, it's anti the country's interests. Given the context, I'll give you the context now of the Expropriation Act, our context right now, although sadly I have personally warned even prior, when it was still a bill, prior to that, the government of the consequences, before of saying, let's find a compromise solution. I actually address the caucuses of different political parties 3-4 years ago on the expropriation bill and saying, here's a potential solution because this thing can fall out so badly that it will hit the country's interests. Now, on the just to focus a little bit more on the expropriation in the context. What is our context now? Our context now is that if you like in Mpumalanga when taxi associations burned the Patco buses. Patco buses are a property, and the infrastructure that they destroy is property. Now, it means that the property is not guaranteed. Property rights are not guaranteed because the government is not doing anything. We've got a world's highest crime rate outside a war zone or outside a civil conflict. The highest murder rate. So your life in South Africa is not guaranteed either. What does it say about property? Your life is a property that somebody can come in and kill you or take your business, come into your house. So your property of your house and your contents are not secure. So we've got a crisis there. And so you've got a construction company and even a government company, the construction mafias comes to you, they take or they say, if you don't give it to us, you're not going to work there. That's a property right? And so we've got a crisis of property rights. And now you bring in the Expropriation Act where you now give the state also that right. It is a recipe for chaos because one cannot create jobs. You cannot deal with poverty and you cannot get growth unless you have rule of law. So we're introducing the Expropriations Act, which we don't need in any case because it's already made provision for in the Constitution in a climate in South Africa where we don't have the rule of law and where our property rights are not secure.
Professor William Gumede, thank you very much for talking to us. I appreciated our time. We could go on and on. I do have several questions to pursue, but due to limitations of time, we have to end it right here. He's the founding director of Democracy Works Foundation.
So just the founder of Democracy Works.
The founder, the founder of Democracy Works Foundation. Much appreciated, and thanks very much. And this conversation we're having for you as members of the Southern African Institute of Government Auditors, we promote accountability, transparency, and obviously the intention being to promote performance within the state. And thank you for watching and for having been part of our audience. Until next time, bye.